Thank you all for joining us today. And just want to start off by kind of reviewing a little bit about what we talked about last week. And last week we talked about prayer. We've been talking about these different disciplines that we can have. And they're disciplines because they're things we need to practice and work on our life. And they can help us improve and grow our relationship with Christ. And so that's what this is all about. And so I hope that you enjoyed prayer last week and getting to grow your prayer life a little bit. And if you took on our church challenge we had last week of gathering together with your family or loved ones and praying, I hope you found that beneficial. I know I sure did. I enjoyed doing that with my family this week. So, this week we'll be talking about the discipline of rest. So, yes, rest is a discipline, and in the world we live in, it's not always easy to recognize that we need rest because the world is constantly telling us to move and do the next thing and be on the move. And there's always one more, after you think you've gotten everything done, there's always one more thing to do, right? I know that's what my Saturdays usually look like. I'm worked my Monday through Friday, and I'm like, finally a day off. And then the list of chores starts to pile up, and it's just one more thing and one more thing, and before you know it, the whole weekend's gone by. And I was hoping for some rest, right? And so that's why it's really important to talk about this discipline of rest, because in the world we live in the busyness of life, we need to plan for it, and it takes practice to make sure that rest gets instilled into our life in the right places. And not only that rest is put in place, but also that we rest the right way, because there's some ways to rest that are beneficial, and there's some ways to rest that aren't always beneficial. So the world we live in is always trying to grab our attention no matter what it is, right? So like I can remember, not so much recently because we stream everything now, but I don't know if y'all remember, um, you know 10 years ago or so, I'd have the TV on myself, like slept with the TV on, and every once in a while, or I'd fall asleep watching a show, and then I'd wake up a couple hours later to this really loud TV ad because they just crank the volume up to 11 for this ad they have on the TV to grab your attention. It wakes you up, and then you're like, what's going on? And then, I don't know, me personally, I'm like, I'm never buying that because it woke me up from a good nap. So, but the TV ads, they're trying to grab our attention. They're always doing something silly to take our attention and keep our attention on that. The younger kids might not remember this, but like in our house, the TV commercial breaks were the bathroom breaks, the snack runs, things like that. We don't have those anymore when we're streaming, but uh, they are always trying to do something to grab your attention and keep your attention during that break from the show you're watching. Phone messages. Doesn't it feel so rewarding when you're texting or getting a message, or somebody liked your post and your phone's just dinging and buzzing? And so that phone is constantly grabbing your attention, and we get that like endorphin release when we get a message and our phone buzzes or dings, and you're like excited to see who's messaged you and things like that. So that phone is always grabbing our attention away from the things around us. And then um, one of the newer ones on my list is doom scrolling. So you get on their Facebook feed and you're like, what's the next thing, and what's the next thing? Or TikTok or shorts, different things like that, where our attention span's going away, because it's like if it doesn't catch our attention in 2 or 3 seconds, we can just scroll on to the next thing. So our world is always trying to capture our attention, and finding new ways to reward us for our attention being drawn to these things that they're trying to draw us to. And so why is it so important that we get this under control, the world taking our time and attention? Is because we need to make sure that we're stopping and being intentional with our relationship with God. And if our attention is always being drawn to these worldly things, then our attention is being drawn away from God and what He's doing with us. And this really kind of parallels with prayer a little bit, because some of the things we want to do in rest is also what we want to do in our time of prayer, because that time of prayer we talked about last week isn't always speaking to God. Sometimes it's also listening, but if our attention isn't on God, how can we be listening to what He's saying? If our phone is buzzing and our TVs are loud, and we're just looking for the next video, we can't be listening for what God is speaking back in these conversations we're supposed to be having with God. And so I want to read a couple scriptures about why and how it is important to God. And so The first one is what Junior read for us this morning, Genesis 2:2-3. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation, so he rested from all of his work, and God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all of his work of creation. So, I don't know if you guys know this or not, but I find it really interesting that our 7-day week actually comes from the first two chapters of the Bible. 6 days of work. God created the earth and everything in it in 6 days, and then rested on the seventh. And that's why we have a 7-day week, is because of this model that God gave us right in the beginning of the Bible. So God created this 7-day week for us to have 6 days to do our work and to be busy and get everything done we need to get done, and then one day to have rest, because he knew we would need that downtime and that rest. And then the next one, so just to recap that, it's, in our 7-day week, God has given us a model of 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. So 1 out of 7, God felt like it was that important to have rest. And then our next scripture is Exodus 20:8-11, and this is one of the 10 commandments. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for ordinary work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons, your daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy. So, one of the 10 commandments, so 1 out of 10, God felt like it was that important to reiterate that it's important to have a day of rest or a time of rest. And so when I read these things, I think back to when I was a kid, and I'm sure for some of those of you that are older than me, that you'll remember even more so than I do, that it was kind of hard to find places that were open on Sundays, because our world was still living by this idea that Sunday was a day of like taking some downtime. We always want Chick-fil-A when we wake up on Sunday morning, but they're still observing that day of rest. They have that time off, and they find it to be beneficial. And they're just as successful or more successful in many cases than other businesses that choose to be open 7 days a week. And so they're still observing that day of rest. But yeah, on growing up as a kid, it was, if we were short on some groceries or had to go pick something up, you had to find the right place to go, because it wasn't a guarantee that every place was going to be open like it often is now. And for those of you who are a little bit younger, I'm sure y'all are like, what do you mean everything's always open? We always have everything we need. That's a really new thing that's happened over the last 20 years or so, I would say, that this transition to being open 24/7 has become a thing, and this disregard of rest has really happened. And so with God showing us the importance of this through the 1 in 7 of creation and the 1 in 10 of commandments, Jesus demonstrated this for us also. He was not concerned about following rules per se. So just because it was a Sabbath didn't mean he wasn't going to do something if it was needed to be done, or wasn't going to act if he was needed. But he always made sure to find proper time to rest and have good time to rest. And it's fascinating to read through the Gospels and see, and I have a couple of examples today, but it's fascinating to read. And anytime, the majority of the time, you see when Jesus does a miracle or is preaching for a long time or serving people, either before or after, Jesus makes sure to have some time of rest. And so we also need to make sure, we're resting the right way. So we're going to read a section of Mark 1:35-39. And I know we're all over the Bible today, but I think it's important to pull some of these different pieces together for given this demonstration of rest that God has given us. So this is all about preparation for Jesus in this section and reading right here. Mark 1:35-39 says, before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. Later, Simon and the others went out to find him. When they found him, they said, "Everyone is looking for you." But Jesus replied, "You must go on to other towns as well. I will preach to them too. That is why I came." So he traveled throughout the region of Galilee, preaching in the synagogues and casting out demons. So Jesus knew what was ahead. He had planned and prepared, and he found an isolated place. In verse 35, it says an isolated place to rest and to pray. So he took that time by himself, not with the distraction of friends or the disciples or somebody saying, "Hey, Jesus, can you just, heal this for me real quick? I know that's you do really big miracles. This one's just a really easy one." He isolated himself and took that time to pray and be connected to the Father and to rest and prepare for what was ahead of him. So he went from town to town and preaching and constantly doing all these good works and casting out demons and other miracles, but he took that time to rest and prepare ahead of these things he knew would take place. And again, this example of rest shows that he went to a place to be isolated and also to pray. So he's having that time of communication with God. That's what that rest looked like for Jesus. It wasn't like just taking a nap out in the hammock. It wasn't like sitting and playing some video games. It was resting by being with God, his Father. The next example, the disciples were on a storm. They were crossing some water, and Jesus was asleep. Jesus and the disciples were on a boat, and a storm had blown in. And Luke 8:24 says this: "The disciples went and woke him up, shouting, 'Master, Master, we're going to drown.' Then Jesus woke up and he rebuked the wind and the raging waves. Suddenly the storm stopped and all was calm." So in this example, we see that, Jesus was sleeping. He needs his rest too. Jesus is God, but also man. And so he needs his rest as much as we need ours. And even though he was asleep, his response wasn't, "Sorry, I'm resting right now. I'm not available." He was ready to wake up and act as needed in this moment where the disciples were in need and fearful. And he not only rebuked the storm, one of the miracles he's done, he also taught them, "Why are you so afraid? There's a plan for your life, and it was not to be taken out by the storm." So he not only woke up from his rest to perform a miracle, but also to teach. And so during this time of rest in our lives, it shouldn't always look like sleeping or doing nothing, but our time of rest should be set aside to focus on God. Remember, the world is constantly trying to take our attention away from God, and we want to make sure that we are setting time aside to be connected to God directly and removing these distractions. That's what rest is all about, is being God-focused and keeping our focus on God. So, just like we've done each week, I want to give you some different steps. If rest might not be one of your strong suits, or maybe you're resting but maybe not finding rest in the right ways, or it's not being beneficial to you, the first step is to find some intentional quiet time. So this intentional quiet time could look like time when you're driving, and I would recommend, if it's intentional quiet time, driving without the radio on and just having some time to yourself, your thoughts, and to connect to God. It could look like your lunch break at work. It could look like just stepping aside and maybe going and sitting out in your car, or sitting in your office with the door closed, kind of thing. Or maybe if you're a parent or a mom, it could look like waking up before your kids and just having that, like, maybe 30 minutes before they wake up to kind of just collect yourself and, again, have that intentional time, that intentional quiet time to yourself. And you might be thinking, asking me to wake up any earlier than I do. I know the feeling. I wake up pretty early myself, but having that intentional time with God will really make a difference in your life. The second step would be to set one day aside a week for family time or intentional time with your loved ones. So this is really important, because as our lives get so busy, we go from, I know in my house growing up, it was soccer practice, cross country. My sister was doing dance, horseback riding, and these things quickly became 7 days a week, chores and practices that we needed to be at. especially once you throw in games and other things like that and work schedules. Um, but the second step would be to set aside a day or an evening, whatever it may look like in your week, and say, today we're just being together as a family, and our focus is on our family, not on all the busyness of life. And then the final step, I would say, is to unplug from the world and plug into God. And so what this looks like is taking that time of rest from removing the distractions and the busyness out of your life to replacing that busyness with intentional time that connects you to God. And so those are the 3 steps that can kind of help you and encourage you in this time of rest. Don't let that time of rest look like falling asleep or scrolling on your phone and things like that. Let this time of rest look like eventually grow into a place where you can put God into your life and have that intentional quiet time with God. And so the last thing I want to leave you with today, as a part of our message, is our challenge. And so our challenge for this week as a church is, I would ask your family to find a time during your week where you can have no electronics, no TV, no phones, no tablets, all that good stuff that likes to go off and grab our attention. Cut all those things off for a couple hours and spend some time together, whether it's playing a card game or an old-fashioned board game, something like that. So that's our challenge this week, is find a time this week to have 2 hours, put your phones away, and just allow the moment to be your full attention, and see where God will take us with that. And so we're so thankful you joined us today. And I just like to share this at the end. All these things, the reason we share these disciplines is so that we can grow closer to God. And the reason we do that is because we are sinners, and the debt we owe for that sin is death. But Jesus paid that debt for us so that we would have the opportunity to be renewed and have relationship with Christ, be connected to God in the same way we were connected in the garden before sin. And today, if you want to accept Jesus into your life, you can have it. You can be a new creation as a child of God. Everyone needs this. Everyone needs the gift of Jesus, and that's why we're here today. And if you'd like to make a decision today, I'll be over here and available. I'd love to pray with you.